Today we are here with the Honorable Robert Stephan, Assistant Secretary for Infrastructure Protection at the Department of Homeland Security. Secretary Stephan was appointed to serve in his current position in April of 2005. In this capacity, he's responsible for the department's efforts to catalog our critical infrastructures and key resources and coordinate risk-based strategies and protective measures to secure them from terrorist attack. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being with us today.
Heather, good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation to come back to sunny California.
Well, we're here to discuss current issues in infrastructure protection. And the first question is, we're approaching the 5-year anniversary of 9/11. What are the top 3 areas that still need to be addressed by state, local, and federal officials?
That's a very good question. We are approaching the 5-year mark since the September 11th attacks. That's a very important hallmark in terms of our progress in the war on terrorism. I think if I were to list the top 3 items in priority, they would have to be, number 1, contingency planning. We absolutely have to do more contingency planning across jurisdictions and across disciplines at all levels so that we can really once and for all tie together the federal, state, and local capacities with those of the private sector in a united front against terror and against actually acts of Mother Nature. We've done a lot in the past 5 years to build up through billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of assistance, building up the capacity of individual jurisdictions across the country and to some extent regional based approaches. I think we just need to do a better job of tying all these together across jurisdictions and across individual disciplines to get the most bang for the buck against our twin-headed adversary of Mother Nature and Al-Qaeda and like terrorist organizations. The second piece is reinforcing training against those plans through robust exercise programs and individual and regional capabilities enhancements across that same set of partners, both on the public sector and private sector side of the equation. And finally, I think that it's very important to once and for all crack the nut of information sharing between public and private sector partners. We've made some important advancements in the Department of Homeland Security, between the Department of Homeland Security and our federal department and agency colleagues, specifically the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But more needs to be done to make sure that we are reaching out to our state and local government partners in a unified approach that's consistent across the nation. A lot of good things are springing up from the grassroots level at the local, the state, and regional levels across the country in the form of information fusion centers, for example, and increased fusion of state-level capabilities. We as the federal government need to get in there in a systematic, sustained approach and help tie this together once and for all to, again, get the most bang for the buck in this important aspect of the Homeland Security mission.
And DHS has been working hard to establish communication and coordination with each state. Can you give some examples of best practices?
Absolutely. We have a program, in fact, that's a partnership between the department and the city and county of Los Angeles here in California, and now this year in 2006, the state of California through the Office of the Homeland Security Advisor to Governor Schwarzenegger. This program is called ACAMS, the Automated Critical Asset Management System. The philosophy here is to adopt an approach that would enhance identification and prioritization of critical infrastructures, asset systems, and networks across a jurisdiction and then across a series of jurisdictions so that state and local law enforcement can get a very good idea of what's critical within their areas of responsibilities. This in turn drives planning and resource investments in real-time operational response, protection, or prevention operations that go down to the level of the local police car or the individual local police car tied to an operations center that is tied to a computer network of computer cataloged systems, assets, and networks depending on the scenario that we might face.
So how is the National Inventory of Critical Infrastructures going?
The National Critical Infrastructure and Key Resource Inventory is a project that the department started really within the first week of its formation, getting ready for offensive military operations in Iraq in March of 2003. We quickly launched an effort to identify and assess what kinds of things were most critical at the national level so we could work with state, local, and federal government partners, and private sector partners for that matter, to bolster the defense across the nation while at the same time executing offensive activities in Iraq. Since that initial effort 3 years ago, we've progressed and computerized a national asset database, which is basically the first generation inventory of critical systems, networks, and individual assets across the country that have something to do with public health and safety, impacts on the national economy, federal, state, and local governance, as well as national defense. Through this national asset database, we can pump in consequence criteria, vulnerability information, threat information, and come out with various types of lists that would in turn focus our planning with state and local government and private sector partners, focus our information sharing in real time with federal, state, local, private sector partners, and finally, and perhaps most importantly, help target our resource investments in this critical mission area, critical infrastructure, key resource protection, that is a subset of the overall Homeland Security mission area. Prioritizing this inventory helps us do that across the board.
What is the relationship between the private sector and DHS these days?
Our goal is to have a very robust and structured relationship with the private sector. As you all are familiar with, the concept that the private sector accounts for about 85% of the critical infrastructures and key resource base of the United States of America. So if we're talking about protecting these types of asset systems and networks, if you do not have a very solid, strong, and robust partnership with the private sector, you're not going to end up protecting very much at all. So the key is sharing authorities, resources, and capacities between the public and private sectors, driving planning, driving strategic resource investments, driving strategic and tactical actions against the threat, whether that threat happens to be Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, like terrorist organizations, or Mother Nature. The trick is to come up with a plan and to come up with a structured approach so that the public and private sector partnership comes alive and is meaningful. We now have a series of coordinating councils and information sharing mechanisms that we've established between DHS, other federal departments and agencies that have an equity in the infrastructure protection mission, and our 17 private sector coordinating council counterparts. So we have now an established mechanism for matters of policy, operational planning, discussing the threat, taking a look at mutually assessing risk in a meaningful, value-added way. We have a coordinating structure set up now for the first time, year 2005, 2006, between DHS and the DHS, other public sector partners, and the private sector. We also have established a partnership with the private sector in terms of realistic threat assessments. Prior to this year, I don't think we did a very comprehensive job in looping in the private sector in developing strategic threat assessments sector by sector. At this point in time, we're bringing the private sector on board with appropriate security clearances to help us develop threat and intelligence products from the ground up that categorize the threat in operational terms the private sector can understand in a meaningful way. They are brought in to this process from the ground up as each of our threat assessment or risk products are being developed, as well as tactical level intelligence that we receive on a day-to-day basis. We're making an effort now to achieve this kind of partnership in this mode in each of the 17 sectors. We've principally begun our focus leveraging the chemical sector and the nuclear energy sector, as well as the electricity, oil, and gas sectors as initial partners in this effort. And by the end of this year, we will have accomplished comprehensive threat and risk assessments for all the critical infrastructure sectors times 17. So that's a very helpful piece of progress. Lastly, but possibly most importantly, we are using our grants programs this year for the first time on a full risk-based approach and are bringing the private sector and state and local government authorities together to do focused planning based upon critical infrastructure target sets that we've prioritized in the National Critical Infrastructure Inventory. So we're wisely using, for the very first time now, risk-based approaches to bring public and private sector partners together to do security planning, determine what the gaps are facility by facility based upon criticality, and figuring out ways between all of us to close those gaps. In some cases, there's a federal solution with grant money that's pushed out the door at the state and local government level. In other cases, it's a partnership, maybe some training, maybe some exercising, maybe some additional patrols on the part of state and local law enforcement that are in the area or vicinity of the plant. And other times it's simply investments or enhancements that need to be undertaken inside the fence of a private sector facility. All of this is coming alive, fueled by the DHS risk engine and the imperative to drive operational planning, gaps analysis, and resource investments wisely, prudently, according to a risk calculus.
So how can state and local officials improve upon these collaborative efforts?
I think, first of all, the state and local officials have been overwhelming in their response in terms of working with the private sector. Our job is to provide coordinating leadership at the national level, but the real targets are out there across America, and in the infrastructure protection mission area, 85% of them, as I said before, lie in the hands of the private sector. However, these facilities exist in a state and local political jurisdiction with state and local law enforcement responsibilities certainly outside the fence of any given facility, and in certain scenarios overwhelming inside the fence responsibilities in terms of a prevention, protection, or response and recovery mission set. I think the key is to continue to use a combination of federal, state, local, and private sector resources to drive the capabilities enhancements and closing the gaps, both of which are required to get to the posture we require across the country. The biggest thing state and local folks can do is to continue to partner with us and come to the table jointly with the private sector and help us reach this calculation in the most advantageous manner possible for all the security partners, and to drive planning, get to know what's critical inside their jurisdictions, get to know the plant owners and operators as well as the security guys, do regular training with the private sector, key facilities inside their jurisdictions, do regular exercises and notification drills, and share and collaborate in terms of information passing back and forth between the private sector and public sector at all jurisdictional levels. That's how we're going to secure the homeland, by working as a team.
Mr. Secretary, do you have any overarching message for our audience in terms of Homeland Security?
Yes, I do. I'd like to leave the audience with one overarching thought, if I could. This business called Homeland Security and the critical infrastructure protection mission area subset of said mission is very tough. It is tough business. We are all living in a 21st century threat and hazard environment. This threat environment spans the spectrum of devastating natural disasters, such as we saw with Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Wilma last year, all the way to acts of mass murder perpetrated by international terrorism or terrorists such as Osama bin Laden and like organizations. The vulnerabilities of America are huge. We live in a free and open society. That's what we are all pledged to protect, to serve, and to defend. We should not change the United States of America, but yet we must realize how vulnerable we are. Just in my mission area alone, the massive interconnectedness and interdependencies involved across the 17 critical infrastructure sectors, the 21st century standard of living that the United States enjoys, it's a vulnerable landscape. And certainly last but not least is the protective architecture across the country is actually a patchwork of individual authorities, resources, and capacities that somehow must come to the table in order to combat this 21st century threat environment in an all hazards context and reduce the vulnerabilities which characterize our society, our government, and our economy. We can do this. This is not an impossible challenge, it's a difficult challenge. We can do this because the authorities, the capacities, and the resources to win on both fronts exist out there. They're just not anywhere in one neat organizational sock. So all of us have to work together to do three things. We have to have leadership at all levels, on the government side and on the private sector side. We have to acknowledge that we do live in a 21st century threat environment, and we have to provide a catalyst to bring the nation together at various levels to deal with these threats when and where they arise. Try to prevent them, reduce our vulnerabilities against them, and mitigate the effects if we are unable to prevent or protect. We have to develop a real partnership between the public sector and the private sector. It has to be a value-added partnership where all parties involved come to the partnership because they realize as individuals they cannot survive in the 21st century threat environment. But as collectives, they can survive, and they can prosper, and they can conquer the 21st century threat environment. And finally, we all have to realize that we all share accountability in this, we share responsibility for this, and we have to bring serious resources to bear according to a plan. That is what Homeland Security is all about in a nutshell. The threats are significant, they exist, they are real, they are not going away. But as partners, with the right amount of leadership and the right amount of resources, we can defeat anything that comes our way. We have done this in the past throughout more than 200 years of history. This may be the most trying of times, but there is no other option than victory against these twin-headed monsters, one called Mother Nature, one called international terrorism. Well, thank you for your time. A great pleasure to be here in the state of California and the city of Monterey with you all today.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for your time today.